welcome. I'm Liz Taylor, ocean explorer, naturalist, and entrepreneur.
And I am Sylvia Earle. I'm an ocean elder, explorer in residence at the National Geographic, and founder of Mission Blue.
This is our show, Dive In, where we host informal and open conversations with the ocean community on topics of wonder and interest. And now we do the most wonder and interest thing and attempt to share our screen. Oh dear. Let's see if we can pull it over here.
Oh, well, wonders never cease.
Some days it works, some days it doesn't.
We're a lucky day.
Yeah, exactly. We want to remind everyone that you can ask questions during the presentation and during the conversation, and then we will get to the questions towards the end and answer as many as we can in the time that we have. We also have links in the chat that will be added by Gigi, so give you some points of reference during the conversation. And we want to remind everyone, as always, that
the world is
blue. Oh dear, let's see, come on, here we go. So before we really dive in today, we wanted to take another opportunity to ask everyone to stand up and dive in for the Goliath grouper.
Yeah, I can't believe that in Florida, they're really considering opening up
open season
on, oh, they say it's going to be restricted, but every Goliath counts. They almost disappeared. And then there was a law put in place that's still in place to protect them. They have started to recover, but they're nothing like what they once were. Most of them aren't truly Goliath. It takes a long time to get from a little baby fish to a great big Goliath grouper. They can live, I don't know, 30, 40 years. We don't know exactly how long. We haven't been allowing them to really reach their full
potential.
Splendor.
Yeah. So in the chat, you'll see an email link to the Florida Wildlife Commission, and it would be awesome if people could drop them an email and tell them that every Goliath grouper matters and they should still remain protected.
You bet. Go, 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 Goliath.
But today we're going to be joined by Richard Pyle and his son, Owen. Richard's a senior.
No, it's Owen and his dad.
Okay, we'll be that way.
Get it? It's just the truth.
So Richard is the senior curator of ichthyology, study of fish, at the Bishop Museum in Hawaii. And Owen is studying mechanical engineering at Cal Poly,
California.
In California. So guys, if you could turn your video, there you are, and microphone's back on.
Richard looks so much like an oceanographer.
He does. It's not even fake. That's the actual wall behind me.
That's great.
Thanks, guys, for joining us
referring
today.
To the oceanographers, you know, the beard.
Oh, right. Oh, I thought you meant the map of the wall. And I've also got my David Attenborough shirt on too. So.
That's right. It's not a plaid shirt, but it's the same. It's kind of that naturalist vibe, right? So, you know, here on the Dive In community, we've talked somewhat about the Twilight Zone, and that's really kind of been your area.
We get the music.
I know we need that music. We needed a slide of Rod Serling or something, but that's that deep area beyond most scuba divers' depths and down onto about 1,000 meters, and you're accessing it with submersibles and more commonly now with rebreather systems.
He treats himself and Owen as a submersible.
That's right. But what is your take on the Twilight Zone region, and why is it so important?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I first started getting into this a long time ago when I would take regular scuba gear and push the limits a little deeper. My PhD advisor, Jack Randall, there's Owen. Okay. My PhD advisor had spent most of his career discovering every new species of coral reef that could be found within scuba depth. So I could only, find new things by going deeper. So that was what you're seeing there is one of my earliest rebreathers, a cislunar Mark IV rebreather built by cave explorer Bill Stone. And we've quickly began to realize that down below where scuba divers get, below 200 feet in the 200 to 500 or 600 foot depth range, there's a lot of species that nobody ever documented before. And it's It's a coral reef kind of habitat. The kinds of fishes you find there, they're definitely coral reef fishes. They're not deep water fishes, but they're often unique. And that was what opened my mind to, prior to that, people had thought of these deep coral reefs as just sort of the outer fringes of regular coral reefs, when in fact, they really have their own environments to themselves. So I called it the Twilight Zone because it's based on Sylvia. Sylvia called it the Twilight Zone decades before I did. And it's this perfect metaphor because it literally is twilight. It's deeper than where the bright sunlight reaches, but you still get sunlight. And you need submersibles like this to go down there. But as a graduate student, I couldn't afford to use this particular submarine at the University of Hawaii. So I had to find other ways to do it. And it was very clear to me that scuba wasn't the regular scuba wasn't the way to do it. And that's what got me into rebreathers. So
why not?
And
You better, people don't know.
all right, well, let me explain it a little bit. When you go on our normal scuba dive, you're breathing air. And it turns out air is about 80% nitrogen, 20% oxygen. And as you breathe oxygen and nitrogen under pressure, they cause different kinds of problems. The nitrogen actually starts to make you feel drunk, inebriated, the deeper you go. There's a Martini's law. For every 33 feet of depth you go, it's like drinking a martini. So the deeper you go, the drunker you get. That's not a wise thing to do. And then the oxygen actually gets toxic. And so the way you overcome those limitations is you mix up the breathing gas mixture, specifically bring in helium to the mix, and you reduce the oxygen, you reduce the nitrogen. And that's why these rebreathers, which are really effective at delivering these mixed gases, are the right tool to allow us to safely go down deeper than where regular scuba lets you go.
and the submersibles over there at University of Hawaii were, an integral tool, kind of at almost as a secondary support system. In some cases, you could dive alongside them even.
You had a buddy diving. Big buddy diving.
But and they used a very similar system in terms of the rebreather aspect, the scrubbing out of the CO2. But the nice thing with the submersible is that it's 1 atmosphere, so there's no decompression when you're coming back, and it's exploring these kind of high relief terrain, particularly around Hawaii, you really get that opportunity to appreciate the, not having a tether.
Well, they're absolutely complementary technologies. So what the rebreathers give us is an intimacy. We can get into caves and into holes.
Right.
And
Reach in there, yeah.
But our problem is time limits, because even with helium, we are restricted for decompression purposes. So if I were to go spend, say, 30 minutes at 400 feet, I'd be looking at 5 or 6 or 7 hours of decompression time.
Right.
Whereas if I went in a submarine, I could spend 8 hours down there and come right back up to the surface.
That's right.
So,
yeah.
yeah. So it's a trade-off between intimacy and time. And so having them both at the same time, we did several series of projects with the Hawaii Undersea Research Lab submersibles where we leveraged the advantages of both to do things that neither could have done alone.
Right. And here's, I guess this looks like the sub kind of coming in and seeing the whole bunch of fish there. Look at them all.
That's a little over 400 feet deep. And those are all coral reef fishes. And remarkably, every fish in that photograph is a species endemic to Hawaii, except one. There's one long-nosed butterfly fish in there somewhere, but all the other fish you see.
Which one is it now?
Yeah, I know. It's like, where's Waldo? It's
yeah, where's Waldo? Yeah. But so it's really so unfortunate that these submersibles, which we have known and loved for so many years, they've been beached. Their ship was scrapped, and now they just sit, and it's just gutting.
It's really sad. And you both know Terry Kirby, who ran that project, and Owen and I got a chance to go when he's out here in Hawaii. He does these regular swims and monitors the reefs out by Makai Pier there, where they used to keep the subs. And he found a turtle that had a fishing line wrapped around it, and he couldn't quite get the line off by himself. So he asked Owen and I to come join him, and we went out there for the swim, but we didn't find the turtle that day, unfortunately.
That's sad. Yeah. So here you are, kind of cruising along with the sub behind.
Yep.
So yeah, and we've done similar things at Pulleys Ridge in Florida. We had a couple of subs, and then we had some
and an ROV
and tech divers, all that converged on that reef. Another deep reef, and they really are very complementary.
The last time we had a dive-in episode, we had Katie Coleman, who's an astronaut, and to do spacewalks, it's like wearing a rebreather. It is a rebreather. There's a parallel with going high in the sky and down deep in the sea. It's all about life support and staying alive in a place where you can't just breathe the atmosphere.
So here we've got Looks like we've got some scuba and rebreather at the same time, maybe, or two different styles of rebreathers. What have you
Two
got?
different styles of rebreather. Yeah, that's me in the front, and I'm wearing a prototype. That was a one-off prototype. Next
Oh,
generation.
great.
The guy in the back. Yeah.
With experimental diving and stuff.
Yeah. Exactly.
Well, you've devised some of the tables that are used.
Mhm.
You're not just a fish guy.
No,
Just-
yeah, no, I've gotten involved in engineering and design and prototyping and testing. And actually, Owen's first dive ever was a rebreather dive. In fact, his first two dives were rebreather dives. The first one, he may not even, I know he doesn't remember because he was negative 1 month old. When his mom, Lisa, was 9 months pregnant, we went for a rebreather dive out at Coconut Island where we lived at the time. So Owen's actually first rebreather dive was before he was born. But then his first actual regular dive in a pool was with a rebreather, not with scuba.
That's cool.
How was that, Owen?
It was cool. I remember being in the pool and just wanting to get out of the pool and into the ocean. But obviously, you have to take those steps, especially with rebreathers. There's a lot of things that can go wrong because there's still a new technology and you need a lot of training. And so I remember after that pool dive, we actually did a beach dive, a short dive on the closed circuit rebreather. And I started getting really into it. My mom was like, all right, full breaks. You're going back to scuba. You got to learn the basics before you go back to rebreathers. So
It's true.
Moms are kind of like that. Huh?
Yeah, she sounds like a grizzly mom, kind of like me.
It was wise. He made the right call.
So yeah, and it is tricky, and the vast majority of divers just are perfectly happy to stick with with scuba, and it works well. But the particularly for what you guys are doing, kind of trying to look at new species of fish that not producing that stream of bubbles, does seem to make a real difference with a lot of animals.
Yeah.
They treat you like one of their own when you aren't going. Blah, 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 blah,
I often tell people that I saw more fish sex in my first couple of weeks of rebreather diving than I had seen in decades of scuba diving prior to that.
Most people don't know that that's a good reason for wearing a rebreather.
Yeah, I think the only fish that really don't care are the little sergeant majors. They'll just come at you for, and maybe the big trigger fish. They'll come at you for any reason.
Well,
So,
I've even had turtles try to mount me once or twice. So you are really like a turtle down there.
yeah, we've had turtles try to do that to ROVs in the past. It's kind of disconcerting,
Especially for the ROV.
And here you are in some of the I guess these are some of the deeper areas where you've got some specialized fish capturing tools.
Yeah, big butterfly nets, high tech life support, low tech, scoop them up with the net to get specimens. So that's actually the holotype of a new species of damselfish that was actually filmed right there by the BBC at the time off Palau at about 400 feet. It's one we ended up naming Chromis abyssus because it's the deepest dwelling of its genus down in deep water.
Oh, that's so cool. And most scientists they're hoping to find one new species that they get a chance to name, and you just kind of make a sport of it. Owen, does he like recruit you to help with some of these names? Or
he doesn't. I know he named one after my mom on their anniversary one year, and then me and my sister kind of looked at each other and were like, when are we getting a name? And he's like, probably not. But I guess the story that I like best is that of centripede narcosis. And he told me the story. I believe it happened when I was a young kid or before I was born, but it was back before he was using helium and he was just on nitrogen. And as mentioned earlier, there's this Martini's law where you get more and more inhibited the deeper you go. So I think you're at depth and you were trying to chase this fish and catch it because it looked interesting and new. And I remember you told me like you had to remember to like manually breathe, no longer automatic. You're stuff in that sense. And as you ascended, the fog kind of cleared and you're like, oh, I wish I had caught that fish. And then like an hour later, you opened the bucket and you had caught the fish and you had forgotten you had caught it and it turned out to be a new species. So that's my personal favorite story.
that's great. That's awesome.
Named it narcosis. And I think the scientific paper said, named in honor of the state of mind of the author when he collected the first specimen.
Well, it's a cool technology. I mean, here you are with a coelacanth, and this is a fish that they really don't like to come out, of the caves. They're very light sensitive. And, most of what we know of them has come from, like the dead ones in a market.
Yeah.
So it's quite excellent to be able to kind of get down on their own terms and visit with them.
Yeah, this is like the holy grail of fish nerds like me.
Yes,
being
it
able to
is.
swim with a coelacanth in its natural habitat. This was off of South Africa, about 400 feet deep.
Is that
We were,
Sadwana Bay?
pardon?
Was that Sadwana Bay?
Yes, Sadwana Bay with Peter Tim. I don't know if you ever met him. He's no
Yeah.
longer alive, but
Yeah,
he was quite a character. But he led my friend Rob Witten and I to go find these things. And we got very up close and personal. And just like Liz said, without making bubbles, the fish was absolutely oblivious to our presence. It just didn't care about us being there. So that was an extraordinary experience.
Yeah. And here you are just kind of, I don't know. I mean, if I saw this coming, I was a fish on the reef, I'd be like,
I'd want to know what the heck is he doing? It looks like he's
Yeah.
out shopping.
Yeah.
yeah, this
That's,
is,
yeah, that was in New Guinea. That's John Earl in the background there. No relation to you, Sylvia, as far as we can tell.
We're
But
kindred
he's-
spirits.
it almost looks like it's an extension of your gear, you know. It's,
Yeah.
you can't really see it's another human being.
Yeah.
Buddy diver.
But it's true. I mean, all these new species and that you found in and around Hawaii, we're going to have kind of a slideshow of fish here, I think. Sylvia wouldn't let me. Well, here you are collecting.
That was the early days. That was before rebreathers. So we got into mixed gases. So we weren't breathing like air down at 350 feet, but we were breathing helium. But I've got 4 scuba tanks and 5 regulators on my back there, and it gave me exactly 7 minutes to work at this thing.
Wow.
So,
Yeah, it's really incomprehensible the physics that are going on there.
But if I recall correctly, the number of fish new species that you catch per hour, what is it?
well, the one best data set we have where we can actually quantify that number, it works out to be about 12 new species per hour, which is extraordinary. All of those are fishes. You could probably get 10 times that many invertebrates because there's so much diversity down there. That's just
Correct. Yeah. All right.
Okay.
Your turn to talk
Yeah,
about.
that's a good one. So that was the one that got me into mixed gas diving. So this fellow Chip Boyle, who was in the Cook Islands, had been doing deep air scuba dives, and he came up from a dive and wrote us a letter. This was back in the days of letters before the internet. Said, "I saw this red and white striped angelfish at 300 feet." And Jack Randall and I said, 300 feet, huh? Did you see it next to the pink elephant? You know, it's like we thought he was
The
imagining.
mermaid.
Yeah, you're right, the mermaid. Right, there you go.
She did it.
But sure enough, you know, I went down there, and this was one of the new species we found, and it's now named Centripigi boylei, which is not a particularly pretty name, but it honors Chip Boyle, for whom it's named. So I think it's known more commonly as the peppermint angelfish, which makes sense.
Oh,
Makes sense. So what
Yeah.
what really goes into kind of naming some of these fish? Is it, or any new species? How do scientists get around to doing that?
Yeah. So I guess the general process works this way. Step number 1 is have as much as you can an encyclopedic knowledge. That's narcosis, by the way. That's the one Owen was talking
oh, the
about.
one this one?
Yeah,
That's
that one there with the black spot. Have an encyclopedic knowledge of what already is known, so that when you see something that's not there, you immediately know how to separate the new ones from the non-new ones. So this is an example one here that John Earl actually first discovered. It's now named Amoditoides Pyle. So it actually got named after me because I collected the first specimen. It's a Hawaiian endemic, but this one wasn't deep. This one was actually only 15 or 20 feet deep out over sand in a place that gets heavily dived. It's just nobody knew that it was something unusual. It took someone like John Earl, who knew his fish in Hawaii so well, to go, I don't know what that is. And so that's step 1, is being able to recognize what's different. Step 2 is being able to collect a specimen. So here's another example of a specimen we collected because we thought that's a lizardfish, but
Yeah.
I've never seen a lizardfish like that. And so we ended up collecting a specimen. Once the specimen's captured, you then examine the specimen very carefully, count its scales and its fin rays, and compare it to the published literature of all the known species. And when you convince yourself that, wow, this truly is something new, nobody's ever named this before, that's where you name it. And that process essentially involves a scientific publication. Now, this is a very special one. This is a frame from a video camera moments after the first human being ever laid eyes on what is now called Tosinoides obama.
That's Tosinoides too.
Yeah, that's Tosinoides obama.
Picture of it.
Yeah, we've got a better
Yeah.
picture of that later.
Yeah, we'll come back to the story behind that one a little
Yeah.
bit. I want you to take note. There's a red spot towards the back of its dorsal fin there with a blue ring around it. This
I see
shows
that,
it
yeah.
better than the other picture does, but that'll come back into the story later. Yep, that's that Amoditoides again.
Yeah.
That's a Pyle thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a blenny that's named after me. That's the one you wrote up about me. It's kind of funny. You had mentioned it in the blurb about this session, and I'd actually forgotten this species was named after me. And I'm like, oh yeah, there's a blenny too. And this is one from Fiji, from deep water. Ah, that's my favorite fish.
What an expression.
What a face.
I love that
Yeah.
face.
We called that the Dr. Seuss fish because we didn't know what else to call it because it looked like something out of a Dr. Seuss book.
Fish. This is the red fish
This is the red fish, not the blue fish.
Yeah, the polka dotted fish. That's it on the reef.
with Papahana.
The first one I used was from the Cook Islands. It's actually the first new species I ever discovered, which is part of why it's my favorite fish.
You didn't bother to pick up a little bit of that algae, did you?
Next time, Sylvia, I promise. Next
Yeah.
time.
Remember to get the hold fast or she'll scold you.
Right, yep, for
Say
sure.
a few words about the collection, because, you know, in the good old days, or maybe the bad old days, a net would have to be dragged across the bottom with a lot of collateral damage.
Yep.
And you'd get a fish that might be intact or maybe not.
Yep. Now, I remember once watching you give a presentation, Sylvia, where you gave this perfect metaphor. It's sort of like, imagine dragging a net through the streets of Paris and then pulling up whatever you catch and then trying to get a sense for what life in Paris is like from the contents of that net you dragged. And I thought that was a perfect example of how difficult it is to use those kind of destructive methods to really understand anything about the environment you're trying to explore, which is why I love using submersibles or rebreathers or whatever to get into that environment and see what's going on.
I mean, it's incomprehensible to me that even today, like we have NOAA that goes out, and when they want to determine like how many fish are in an area and how many fish can we take sustainably, they trawl for the fish. You know,
Kill
like,
a lot of fish.
they kill all kinds of things in the process and try to then extrapolate that information. And why not take the time and effort to
Go down there.
go there and really understand the entire system and look
Right.
at look at the entire environment before
Killing
you.
animals to count the animals should not be
Wacky.
allowed.
I've teased my friends who do this sort of thing and say, well, you're not telling us how many fish are there. You're telling us how many fish were there. Now they're not there anymore.
Yes, exactly right. Let's clear cut the forest and count the dead trees. There's another thing about the color, because I recall a distinguished fish guy, ichthyologist, saying that he really couldn't, unless you had already pickled the fish, wasn't really possible to tell, because he didn't really like seeing all the colors because it was confusing. He wanted a gray, dead pickled fish so he could count the fin rays and look at the lateral line without the complications of color and all that. But I think, this is what makes it real. This is the way the fish actually lives. This is life in the ocean. And your ability to photograph them as well as capture selected specimens, not a whole trawl full.
Yeah.
To be able to really dignify them with a name and cause people to understand who they are.
There we are.
There you guys are.
Owen, do you remember that?
I do.
That's with Gary Nell,
Yeah.
who has been the big boss at National Geographic for many years. And
Yeah.
that fish, now tell all.
Yeah. All right. Well, so this event was the premiere for Sea of Hope, and Owen and I were invited up by you to come out there, and we brought this framed image of this fish we had just named at the same time. So basically, this is a little red fish, and we showed the picture earlier of it on the reef that we very unexpectedly discovered on one of our NOAA cruises up to the northwestern Hawaiian Islands, the Papahana Mokukea Marine National Monument. And the timing of this was such that we discovered this in, I think it was July of 2016, the very same month that President Obama was deciding whether or not to expand that monument from its already large 50-mile extent to a 200-mile extent. And the new science had come in to support that. And we were trying to tell them, look, this is the right thing to do. And we were actually, when we discovered this fish, and this is what I refer to the spot on the back, it's got a blue ring with this sort of red and yellow interwoven, stripes that vaguely looks like the Obama, campaign symbol, the blue O with the. And so I joked, hey, we should name it after Obama. And then we realized, wait a minute, if he expands this monument, This fish is the only fish we know that's endemic to the monument. In other words, it's found nowhere else on Earth except the monument. It's the only fish like that we know of. So sure enough, he expanded the monument, and so we named it after him. I don't know if you have the other picture, Liz. That's the one.
Yeah.
So I love this shot. So actually, Owen and I, we'll come back to this in a minute. Owen and I were standing in that exact spot 24 hours before this photo was taken. The Secret Service shushed us off the island before the president came. But when you name a new species after somebody, you generally want to get their permission. But this particular guy is kind of hard to get direct access to. But Sylvia, you had the opportunity to go explicitly ask him. And I believe his words were he'd be honored to have this fish named after him. So.
And the fish is honored too.
Yeah.
That's at Midway Island. Yeah.
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 So this, I think that one thing that a lot of people don't really think about is like that this very rugged terrain that is right below the surface, and we really don't think about it because we see like the beautiful
Surface.
the sunset, the waves, the seabirds, things like that. We may dive or snorkel down, the 60, 100 feet or so, and enjoy a lot of the fish life that we see. But when you really take stock of these seamounts, they're these underwater features that are really islands that haven't reached the surface yet, and so many of them do have, as you say, endemic species related to them. And this kind of shows a few of them. Few of the ones around Hawaii.
And some of these are in the high seas. The high seas seamounts that come close enough to the surface to actually be crowned with coral.
Yeah, and that's what's exciting to me. It's this notion of coral reefs, outside of national jurisdictional waters, which was a foreign concept to me just a couple of years ago until, Sylvia, you and I and others were talking about protecting the high seas. And I kept asking myself, well, I'm a coral reef fish guy. What do I have to offer on a conversation about the high seas? There's no coral reefs in the high seas. And then I thought, wait, are there coral reefs in the high seas? And that's what led us down this path. And sure enough, we now have confirmed there are coral reefs out there that are outside of jurisdictional waters.
Yeah,
Which makes them vulnerable
very
Yes.
vulnerable.
because it's open season on wildlife in the high seas.
Yeah. So you had a few images.
Yeah, let me, if I can
So,
share my screen for just a
So
moment.
I'm going to escape for a second,
Okay.
maybe. I'm going to stop sharing for a second so you can pop in
I
and
need to
show
be given permission to share my screen, I think.
Gigi. Can
Oh, there we
you-
go. No, I'm good. I'm good. Okay.
Um,
So I don't know if you can see just nothing but blue, then you're in the right place. Can you see that? Okay.
Yeah, we see that.
So this is actually an aerial bird's eye view of a part of the Pacific Ocean, which at first glance is what most people think about the open ocean, just lots of blue and nothing of interest. But if you look really carefully, it turns out there's actually a whole bunch of tiny little islands in there. And if you look, if you squint just right, you can see them in there. Chook, or formerly Truk Lagoon is probably the most famous one, but all these little tiny dots scattered out across the ocean. So you realize there are these islands, but even still, to the naive person, it's still a blue void with tiny pinpricks of islands on there. But the really revealing thing is when you take away the surface of the ocean and look what's going on underneath, and you see these vast regions of these dark blue patches that are actually shallow water coral reefs. And there's actually more than 4,000 square miles of shallow coral reef habitat in this picture. And you never would have guessed it based on just those little pinpricks. And some of these are known. They have, names. The one right there in the middle is my favorite. I did a dive there once. Sylvia and I have talked about this often, Gray Feather Bank.
Oh, to Gray Feather Bank.
Legendary Gray Feather Bank. It once in time in history was the world's largest atoll, even larger than Kwajalein, which is, I think, the largest current atoll.
Yeah.
And so what you're looking at that looks like a blue blob is actually, it's about 60 feet deep all around the perimeter and about 200 feet deep in the middle. So it's a giant atoll that's now just went kerplunk, 60 feet down. And you can see there's all kinds of reefs out there that are in that same situation. These submerged reefs that no one knows about.
And the atoll is kind of sort of the remnant of an old volcano, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So the first was a volcano, then there was a fringing reef, then there was an atoll, and now there's this submerged guyot, or submerged flat top seamount. But this one comes right up near the surface, only 70 feet deep, 60 feet deep in places. So
Right.
You don't see it when you're flying overhead.
Or sailing across it or anything.
Right.
They really are out of mind and out of sight for the most part. And the really unfortunate part is that because there are maps of these areas, that they are targeted by industrial fishing. So oftentimes I know that, we've been out with the ROV or with the submersible, and you'll just see these big sections of net and long lines and all manner of derelict gear that's just washed up on these mounts, or attached to them, or kind of sawing through the corals. Even it's just awful to find that stuff out
People
there.
don't know the real cost of the fish that arrives in the marketplace.
No.
It's interesting that the circumstances that allowed us to make one dive at Great Feather Bank, we were actually nervous getting in the water, because seamounts out in the open ocean tend to attract big spooky sharks. And so we were, fairly nervous, and then terribly disappointed to discover that there weren't any sharks at all.
No.
And we thought, well, that's weird. And then we started finding the long line gear hung up on the reef. And we realized the fishermen have already been here, taken advantage of it before the scientists even got a glimpse of what it must have been like before the fishermen.
Right. And correct me if I'm wrong, but many people have told me that the seamounts actually will have endemic species just specific to one seamount, even if they're kind of in the same area, but they are truly like these islands that just haven't come to the surface yet.
Yep.
And
Or they were on the surface.
or they were on the surface, and now they've sunk, but they really do become home to very specialized groups of animals.
Yeah.
And fishes. And have you looked as well at kind of what the verticality of some of these species are?
Well, so I haven't gone much deeper than where I can go, but I know that folks like Alan Friedlander with Sustainable Seas and others are trying to do transects that sort of see the transitions from the shallow water all the way to the depths. And I think the emerging theme is it's all connected, right? Everything's
Right.
connected in fact, not just the surface, but, Palmyra, which is another thing that, Sylvia, you and I are both sort of engaged
You want to go?
is, some of the folks from TNC were explaining to us, it's like we have this vision as like the surface is here, and then there's terrestrial and marine, and they don't even see that distinction. It's the guano from the birds that feed the plankton that give the nutrients to the reefs, and it's really almost an artificial line between underwater and above land. It is an entirely interconnected community and ecosystem.
The same is true in the Galapagos, where 97% of the land is protected and 3% is open for humans to occupy and do things. But the ocean, it's just the reverse.
Yeah.
About 3% is protected, highly protected, even around the precious Galapagos Islands, and the rest is kind of open for fishing of one sort or another. That's changing. They're really looking to increase the protection because of exactly what you said. If you want to have flightless cormorants, if you want to have boobies, if you want to have sea lions, penguins, you can kill them by starving them, by taking what they must eat. We have choices, they do not. And fishing has really greatly increased over the years in the Galapagos Islands. People haven't lived there until fairly recent times, certainly not a long history of human habitation, which is part of the reason that the animals there have no fear of us, of humans.
Yep.
And Palmyra, it's another example of a place, it's been, during the war, it was sort of heavily abused on the land and in the surrounding sea, but when Nature Conservancy acquired the island and protected the land and allowed the land to recover, more needs to be done for the surrounding sea, or the land will not continue to recover.
And what can people really do to kind of help get more protection for seamounts themselves? Are there things
do?
Is it kind of a UN issue? Is it a local issue? Would it help to kind of expand our EEZs? What could we do?
It's almost like the epitome of the tragedy of the commons. By having these things out there in non-jurisdictional waters is kind of like the Wild West free-for-all. And I think UN level solutions are the only ones that'll work, but even those might not work. You need to add a layer of enforcement on top of it. Just because you have laws doesn't mean everyone's going to automatically obey them. And
right.
So, it's a multifaceted problem, but, one that we can't, the future of our species depends on us solving.
But you know what? this is the best opportunity, protection for the high seas. It's close to half the world. And with goals right now in motion to protect by 2030, 30% of the land, the freshwater, and the ocean in the next 10 years. This our watch right now. It's Owen's job too, you know.
You're it, Owen.
Really imagine by 2030, if we do not step up to the best chance we will ever have to secure large parts of the systems, our life support system, the high seas, areas on the land, areas in coastal waters, whatever, it all is now at risk. That means we're at risk. You know, astronauts, we heard it from Katie Coleman, you focus on your life support system. You want to know everything you can about it, and you want to do everything you can to take care of it.
Right.
And here we are abusing our life support system. We have a chance. And I think the focus right now is growing about what can we do now if we wait 10 years because of the effect of the ocean on climate, the importance of the ocean for biodiversity, for the life itself. That chance, that opportunity will slip away. And so, I mean, Owen, you're so lucky.
Owen's like, why are you picking on me?
I'm in a technical writing class right now, and professor, all credit to him, using sort of problems with biodiversity and climate change as the medium for teaching tech writing. So we've been reading different books and watching videos, and we just finished watching one on Greta Thunberg addressing the European Union in 2019. And she mentions how like older people look to her and say, "You're the future, like you're gonna fix all our problems." And
Yeah,
the
right.
reality is we don't have the time. Like we need to act now. We can't just wait until the
Exactly.
next generation takes over, because at that point we're going to be so enthralled with positive feedback loops and like melting permafrost and all these various things, and we might even get to levels of ocean fish populations that are irrecoverable. So we need to act now, and definitely a part of that is education and kind of socializing our kind of our dominant culture and what we should value, and instilling that from a young age. But at the same time, action needs to be done now, and it's not just the younger generation.
Right. It's all hands on deck right now, it seems.
Yeah, the urgency. I think that's the thing that people aren't quite getting yet. Scientists have known this for decades, but you know, it's time that everybody else, especially the political leaders, grasp the immediacy of the problem, not the,
Right.
oh, this is something the next generation can deal with problem.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it isn't like in 10 years time the world's going to blow up, like that's our limit. It's in 10 years time we might reach a point where the world slowly, on like a not a geological time scale, but definitely more than the human mind is used to dealing with problems. And so it's not like the problem is immediately evident. Yes, there are things happening now, but it's the beginning of a problem that could be unsolvable later.
Right.
It is the last best chance. It's going to get harder and harder as we lose ecosystems, as we increase the temperature, as the world changes. And it has changed is changing at an accelerating pace. So that's why we have to really hurry. I think of the species that have already been lost, the ecosystems that we can't put back because it has taken not just hundreds of years, not even thousands of years, but millions of years to assemble the ingredients that we're now looking at the high seas, at deep sea mining to scrape the ocean floor, to get metals, minerals that are the result of living processes, the batteries that we now look to power the green revolution, if you will.
Yeah.
Some are saying we need to go to the deep sea to get those materials because it's such a messy process taking these metals like lithium and cobalt and nickel from mines on the land. Who cares about the deep sea? Out of sight, out of mind.
Well, we've been trying, quite for some time and you continue to work on kind of democratizing the sort of working access to the ocean, and with your project Deep Hope, which is, involves these two submersibles. It's a real opportunity for people to understand, not just scientists or just a handful of people, to broadly increase the reach of people to visit these areas and explore versus exploit them.
Hmm.
And we've always kind of looked to find ways that we can leverage the kinds of investments that are being made today in the automotive sector and other tech sectors with, new materials and, the battery technology.
Yeah, we should not have to be reliant on a handful of metals, minerals like unobtainium that were featured in the Avatar film.
Right.
But you have a special interest in that, in batteries and such.
Yeah, I guess my mind and my dad's mind kind of works the same. We like that sort of taxonomy, organizing data points and kind of finding similarities. He does it with species. And I guess the backstory on this is my grandfather was an ornithologist or a birder, and my grandma too. And so they always dragged my dad around on the birding adventures, and to the point where he got oversaturated, and now he hates birds. So that's why he's a fish guy. So
Hate birds.
I did. I did. We've come to a mutual agreement now, but yeah.
he wanted to do the opposite for me and basically give me options of what I wanted to explore. And I think to some extent he may have gone a little too far in the opposite direction, didn't expose me to the world. So naturally my desire to categorize things kind of went to what's surrounding me in the world. And obviously cars are everywhere. So I guess from a young age, I was like pointing out different cars and like relating them their similarities. And as I've gotten older and learned more about global problems, I'm more aware of the problems with cars, so to speak, and how the electric industry is changing. And you were mentioning with the deep sea mining, I believe they're like talking about mining for lithium down there. That's the argument for it. But in my tech writing class, again, I read a paper on what's called solar geoengineering, which is this idea of how to stop climate change, where basically you just fill the air with amount of sulfur, and the way it works is sulfur kind of acts as the opposite carbon forcing, or the opposite forcing of carbon, so it would actually decrease global temperatures as a greenhouse gas. But just because it solves a problem doesn't mean it's the best solution, because it would also interact with the ozone layer, deteriorate that. Once it falls out of the stratosphere and down to lower elevations, there would be millions of deaths and cancer from all this excess sulfur. And those are just the known unknowns. There's the real problem lies probably within the unknown unknowns, things we don't know about until it's too late. So I don't think you can use like mining as a justification for fixing the problems with biodiversity if it ultimately does more harm than good. And the only way we know if it can do more harm than good, aside from just being reasonable and saying it's not a good idea to tear up the bottom of the ocean, is with increased research and information. Because right now we're kind of in the blind. I mean, we know more about the surface of Mars than the bottom of the ocean. So it's only with increased research that we can start making more informed decisions and have a better understanding of all of these intricate biodiversity systems.
Right. And it seems like a really logical path is to, just finding, really aggressively going after the changing of this, disposability mindset.
Yeah.
And how do we find materials, and how do we upcycle, recycle, make a battery that's going to last, 20 years, 30 years, really increase
out of materials that are not like unobtainium.
Right.
That are rare.
Or that we can at least, keep recycling them. So we do have a very circular economy right from design. And I think it's, we've really seen and continue to see the impacts of just, bad and lazy engineering in many cases, or convenient engineering. And we
throwaway engineering.
Yeah, toss away. And it's, I love seeing, it in many of the interns that we have come through and our younger engineers coming in, that they really are now looking at existing problems and new designs with an eye to that sort of cradle to cradle manufacturability and recycling.
Definitely. Yeah.
And so in your car taxonomy, have you kind of identified areas that we should really be looking at and kind of best choices, best practices as people are considering what they should be driving around?
Well, I think the first thing is to consider that whole reduce, reuse, recycle mindset. Everyone's familiar with recycling. It's kind of become like the thing to do, but it actually is at the bottom of that pyramid. The most important thing is to reduce and then reuse and then recycle. So there also needs to be some attention to like kind of the social engineering of does everyone in the world need a car? I mean, if you live 10 minutes from work, there's so many other options. And we've kind of gotten to this point where it's the inconvenient truth. Cars are convenient. I have one, well, not with me in California, but back home, and they're just so useful. But definitely, and as far as like actually changing the technology, I mean, as with all technology, when you first start doing something, it's really expensive. You don't have economies of scale. You don't have the right technologies. I mean, I guess cell phones back when they were bricks were like incredibly expensive, and all you could do was call people, and only to a limited extent. And now we have virtually supercomputers in our pockets. So it does take time to change the technology, and it is costly, and that's a big problem. And a lot of companies don't want to sacrifice profit margins for pursuing that technology. I think Elon Musk is doing a good job of changing that around. But yeah, so a lot of it actually comes down to really expensive kind of high performance technologies, like in Formula One, or these companies like Rimac, which is this Croatian car company that are like basically building $1 million cars to sell to these billionaires, which is like, how is that practical? But it can also be looked at as advanced R&D, and then that technology trickles down into more of the economy market, like other things have in the past, anti-lock brakes and things like that.
Yeah, and I like to kind of find ways that we can take something that has been really pretty well researched, and then find ways that we can apply it to other, into other things that we can use underwater, or things that we can use in infrastructure inspection, or just find other ways to
In space,
in space, but
everywhere.
to if we're going to put that kind of time, energy, and investment into something, try to make it as multidisciplinary as possible. And I think sometimes like we get a little too competitive. Like, this is my design, no one can use it. This is my battery technology. So if we got so maybe a little less greed in the world could have a really big benefit. So,
What a concept.
what a concept, right? So how do you see, Richard, in looking at some of the rebreather technology, do you see that advancing as well in new ways?
Well, already it is. So over the last few years, we've been experimenting with a new oxygen sensor technology. So oxygen sensors were the thing that allowed Walter Stark back in the 1960s to invent the first electronically controlled rebreather. And he actually used to make his own oxygen sensors. So just explain that in a little more detail. What kills people on rebreathers is either too much oxygen or too little oxygen. And what prevents that from happening is reliable oxygen sensors, so that you and your electronics can know how much oxygen you're breathing. And so the technology of oxygen sensors remain pretty much the same basic idea. These galvanic oxygen sensors that had to be calibrated for every dive from the late 60s all the way through, I would say, 4 or 5 years ago. And the paradigm shift that's happened is we now have these new solid state optical oxygen sensors, which are freakishly reliable and never have to be recalibrated. And it's been such a mind-blowing game changer for me, because the mindset of a rebreather diver is like literally every moment of the dive is, how much oxygen am I breathing? How much oxygen am I breathing? That's always back there. And now, you don't want to get complacent and just trust the technology blindly. But having sensors that are just always reliable allows me to free up a little more of that gray matter to focus on, why am I down here? Is that a new fish? Is that interesting? Sylvia might want that algae, and if I'm not distracted by the life support system, that's one of the big ways going forward that I think the rebreather technology is about to hit a new paradigm.
So for those who might not understand, I thought oxygen was good for you. What do you mean, too much oxygen?
Yeah.
Right. So as I mentioned before, air is toxic because the narcosis factor, causes you to name silly names for new fish, but it also, makes you make bad judgment. But the oxygen becomes toxic. And so we have to actually reduce the oxygen. And it's not widely known, but if you breathe pure oxygen below a depth of about 20 feet, you could have a seizure. And my best friend died basically because of an oxygen problem in a rebreather. So it's a very serious thing that we have to, constantly be aware of. But yes, too much oxygen can be just as deadly as too little oxygen.
Exactly. So it is a very, technical sector, and it's, I think it certainly has its applications, certainly in the scientific realm, and it's, but as you say, you never can. Just like the ocean, you never turn your back on it.
Love it, but respect it.
Well, yeah, you just, complacency is stone cold. It won't, there's no,
It's humbling. And in fact, I want to tie this back to that last photo you showed. I don't know if it's possible to bring that one back up again of Owen on the beach with the monk seals, but
let's
there's
see.
a humbling aspect to doing what we do. And I'm sure you've experienced this, Sylvia. It's like when you actually go out in the environment, like when I go on my dives, or you go on your dives or submarines, or Owen goes out hiking in Montana, and you sort of get away from the human world, you begin to realize how trivial we are in the broad context of Mother Nature. And you earn this, you gain this respect for Mother Nature. And I wanted you to bring this picture back because this was a really cool moment in my life, and I think Owen and yours as well. This was that 24 hours before the photo of you and President Obama at the same beach there at North Midway Atoll. And we had a break, we were filming Sea of Hope then, and we had a little break. And so Owen and I took a stroll down this beach, which is my favorite place on earth. Every time I go to Midway, I love spending time on this beach. And after about 10 minutes walking down the beach, we had seen about 10 or 11 monk seals. And Owen hit me with a question that just blew my mind. He said, so wait a minute, you're just telling me we just saw 1% of the entire world population of monk seals in our 10-minute stroll down this beach? And, that picture represents, he and I sat there on the beach and contemplated this. I don't know if you remember that, Owen, but that was...
I do, yeah, that was, and it really speaks, being in California, growing up in Hawaii, it's Hawaii, like everyone lives there and knows what it is, but in California, it's like, oh, you're from this magical place, Hawaii, like beautiful reefs and all that. And to an extent, yeah, like the main Hawaiian Islands, I love freediving in Kaneohe Bay, and obviously Hanauma Bay is a big tourist spot. But now that I've seen this, I'm like, you have no idea where the true beauty lies, because people don't have a scale for what it should be like. And so it's only when you go to somewhere that you can see what it should be like, and maybe even Midway's been experiencing effects that we don't even know about because we didn't have documented reports dating back hundreds of years. It's a relative scale, and some people might just go and dive in Hanauma Bay and see 12 fishes and be like, it looks fine to me, but that's not how it works.
Yeah.
1,200 or 12,000.
12,000. Yeah. It's that shifting baseline that's so
Yeah.
hard to communicate. And even though, so much information has been digitized, a lot of historic information just isn't. And you really have to go work for it to find it so that you can have a proper comparative.
Baseline.
Yeah, and that's if it even
Baseline.
exists, because so many places don't even have surveys
There's
that have been
Two
done.
little lumps out there where the sand and the sea
Yeah.
come together. Those are monk seals.
Those are two monk seals, right? I guess I probably should have explained that, but yeah, so we had to keep
Not
our
rocks.
Yeah, they're not rocks. They're actually living. Two of the 11 we saw in that 10-minute stroll. But there was another thing that ties into what you were just saying about this moment on the beach. The other thing Owen asked me, we were just sitting there on the sand looking at the monk seals and looking at the horizon, and he said, so if you go back 1 million years or 4 million years, was this beach here? Did it look like this? Is this what it was like? And I actually had to do the math in my head, like, okay, Midway Atoll, how old is it? Was it an atoll? And I realized, well, this beach probably wasn't here, but it was probably, a kilometer away, or, but it made me realize, looking around, like there's plastic on the beach. Here we are at one of the most remote spots on Earth, and you can't escape human encroachment. And as Owen was just saying, looking out over that lagoon there, it's like, well, that water temperature is on average a couple degrees warmer than it was a century ago, right? We are having an impact. And Owen's question prompted me to really think, what does it mean to have been in an environment pre-humans, truly pre-humans, like 1 million years ago or 5 million years ago?
We are
And
recent royals.
yeah. And, until you start asking those kinds of questions and thinking about it that way, I don't think most people really appreciate the magnitude of what we're up against.
Yeah. It's pretty shocking.
Even Rachel Carson imagined, because we didn't know in the 1950s, that where the land masses are is kind of where they've always been, not realizing that over many millions of years, the land has shifted and continues to move. Change is continuous throughout the history of the planet, but nothing to compare with the change that has been experienced in the last 100 years, owing to the impact of humans. This new era that is all that you've ever known, Owen. It's the Anthropocene, where humans are having such a powerful impact on the natural world that a geological time has been assigned. it's the Holocene going back 11,000 years, but now merging into what is dignified with a technical name, the Anthropocene, about humans altering the nature of nature.
Yeah.
And, I guess all creatures alter the nature of the world. Even the fish move the rocks around to build nests sometimes, but look at how much we have moved around to suit our prosperity. But it's not infinite. And that's why now is so important. It's the combination of how much change, how rapidly it's changing, the awareness of it, and the fact that there's still time to, just heal the harm
Mhm.
and find a place within the natural systems that keep us alive. And if we didn't know, that would be a really big problem. But we know. That's the great thing. We're armed with that most important thing. We're not ignorant. I mean, a lot of people either don't know or they don't care. But we have to have enough momentum of those who do know and do care to really resist the constant pulse of destruction, of consumption. There's only so much planet and only so much time.
Mhm.
So let's get busy.
Let's get
Yay.
busy. So I have, seeing this picture, I have to ask, and I've been pelted recently with a lot of people asking me, like, what can we do to help parrotfish? Because you see all this sand here. You can thank parrotfish for this, a lot of this sand, right?
Yeah.
And I don't think, I mean, I know parrotfish are not a deep fish. They're
No. Jack
how deep do they go? How deep does a parrotfish go?
Oh, we've seen them down well over 200 feet. There's certain species.
Okay, so fairly deep, but
They get down there, yeah. But
But
I think
I'm-
most of the sand comes from the shallow water ones.
yeah, but I don't think a lot of people are aware of how important those fish are to the formation, to the health of the reefs. As you say, throughout wherever reefs occur in the tropics, and then the production of sand from what they eat,
Yeah.
and its contribution to really kind of holding beaches where they are. I've just been seeing so many of them in markets lately that it's quite alarming. And
That was another profound thing. Earlier this same day, Sylvia, when you and Owen and I and others went out snorkeling, even I, who've been to Midway many times, we were sitting in, sort of chest deep water, surrounded by the biggest parrotfish. You can't even see my hands on the video
Really?
how large these were. And you would never see them in the main Hawaiian Islands that large.
No.
And they were all around us. And
That's
people got
wonderful.
the sense, but that's what normal is, or even probably not, that's not even normal, but it's closer to what normal used to be. They would realize how profoundly different the reefs in our own backyards are now.
Yeah, I mean, they're incredible fish, and I think you'll probably not like it, but I always call fish the birds of the sea.
I'm okay with that. I made my teeth.
But I really do hope that we would get people, as fired up about fish as they are about birds.
Yeah.
And really start, keeping life lists and caring about them in that
Fish
same
watching.
way. Fish watching. And so I really hope that with our Deep Hope subs that we're going to get, more people stoked up about, how many fish did you see? Which species did you see? And they'll be kind of, crazy and obsessive and travel 1,000 miles to see, a fish named after you.
I want to ask Owen that question that we get all the time is, okay, so what do you tell people when they ask, what can I do? I mean, I know you've been thinking about it.
It's not an easy question to answer. There's a lot of conflicting reports, but the way I see it, there's two different approaches and both should be applied. The first is minimizing your own impact. So like making better decisions about what you buy, if you need to buy, and just kind of reducing the impact that you have. But then there's only so many people who are going to take that approach that it's not going to have a big enough impact. So the second approach is to educate really and to advocate. Because even if you don't live in Hawaii and these problems don't affect you directly, they definitely do indirectly. And so that's making sure you show up to vote, making sure you've done your homework on whose policies, what's just, they say they're going to do it, but they probably won't, and who actually cares. And I don't know, do you have any input, Dad? Because I'm curious to know what you think as well.
It's the most difficult question I always have. You know, voting always comes to mind because so many things are driven by the almost arbitrary nature of who's in charge of different governments around the world. And I, you know, I say almost arbitrary with a little bit of my tongue in cheek, but a little bit not. And it has so much to do with how empowering it is to be able to have a say, in the US at least, over who's making the decisions. And so people who choose not to vote are, you know, actively part of the problem. So I definitely, you know, latch onto that. And I also agree with the personal use thing. I mean, it seems like it's so trivial to, you know, ask the waitress not to bring you a plastic straw, or, you know, it seems like you're doing nothing. But if you multiply that by everybody, it's no longer nothing. It's a real meaningful difference. And I think all of us in some ways lead by example among our peers and our friends and whatnot. And so even if you're just, you know, even it seems like it's a lot of work to do hardly any impact, it's not hardly any impact. It has a cascading effect. So I think that's kind of what gives me hope and gives me focus.
Yeah. And another thing I want to touch upon is how Sylvia always loves to say, no child left dry. I think you can't care about protecting something if you're never experiencing it. So you definitely do need to go outside, get in the water, get in the mountains. Because if it's just something in your normal life, when you think about, you can make it a peripheral problem and think, all right, things are working for me right now. Maybe not consciously thinking this, but subconsciously, my world is structured and it seems to be working fine, or I have bigger problems at hand. But as you spend more time outside, you get more of an appreciation for what matters in the grand scheme of things. And so when I was in 3rd grade, I joined this hiking club, and I think it got put in the chat, called Wild Kids. And it kind of just started as a group of 12 of us. We'd go out in the forest and go play capture the flag and go on little hikes and just have a good time outdoors, away from technology and all these other things. But as it kind of grew, as I progressed through middle school and then high school, all of a sudden, more and more people found that they could relate to that, and that's something they wanted to be a part of. So now we have over like 300 or 400 members, multi-generational, from kindergarten all the way up to adults. We've run trips to Montana. We do fundraising so that students in Hawaii can experience the great outdoors, big wilderness in Montana, learn what hardship is outdoors. And then we've even branched off to do environmental efficacy and advocacy. Because of COVID, I'm not talking as much as I used to, so I'm stumbling over the words a little more. But we invite students from other schools, and we even hosted like an international conference where we had students from, I think, over 10 countries come, and they weren't forced to go. It wasn't a school requirement. It was genuine interest and passion and concern for these problems. And so the younger generation does want to help. And by getting outside and getting our children outside and away from just playing Angry Birds on iPads all day, every day after school, or watching YouTube, then that kind of instills in your neural network, and it becomes a part of who you are, because you may not realize that you're part of biodiversity, but you definitely are.
Well, people ask me sometimes, again, about what to do. They say, well, do you eat fish? And I say, does Jane Goodall eat chimpanzees? I mean, it's like, once you really
think about it,
see these wild creatures and understand they have lives. I mean, okay, I'm a fish hugger, but it's more than that. To recognize their importance in maintaining the planet that keeps me alive, and to respect that. Some people will always consume ocean wildlife. I get that, but there's no excuse, really none, for the industrial extraction of wildlife. And we, those who are the consumers, can make choices that say, I didn't know until I just learned that there's such a small number of tuna left in the ocean. Every tuna counts. So thank you, but no tuna. I mean, I'm not telling others how to live their lives or what to eat or not eat. But again, if you know, you can make your choices with the present and future in mind. And you ask, what can I do? Well, think about it. Here are the problems. What part of the solution or what part of the problem can you be? As you said, Owen, everybody counts. and
Yeah, everything.
times 7 billion.
I'm creeping to 8.
Yeah.
So we've got a few questions from people. So if we can jump on to those. And so Carolyn is asking, are all the fishes that we showed from the Twilight Zone, or are some from the subtidal areas?
Yeah, most of them are from among the deep water ones we've discovered. And by deep, I mean generally deeper than about 200 feet. There was that one long skinny one. That one, like I said, was in 10 or 15 feet. It's not often we find new species in shallow water just because there's so many people who have been there, done that already. But we do find them from time to time. But yes, most of the ones that you showed were actually from the deeper coral reefs.
And it's cool. I mean, have you ever kind of looked to see or had time to really see if they do they go through a vertical migration night to day to night, or?
You mean the shallow water ones? So yeah, so they're hard to study because they live away out over sand and they're ephemeral. So when you find them, there's 10,000 of them. And then the next day they're just gone. And we don't know where they go. Yeah. And they do show up in the larvae. So we know they're all around the Hawaiian Islands. They do show up on submersible videos down deep. So we do know they do go deep. I don't think they go up and down with the day. In fact, this particular fish is called a sand lance. It lives in the sand at night. That's how we were able to collect it. We kind of waited till it dived into the sand, but which is cheating a little bit. But yeah, no, that's one of the mysteries. It's shallow, it's right there, but it comes and it goes, and it's more often gone. And it just, when it shows up, it's here and then it's gone. So it's hard to study something like that.
Absolutely. You need to sit down there with the sub for 8 hours at a time.
Yeah.
Could you comment just a moment about the rest of the Twilight Zone, the greatest migration on Earth?
Right. So the open ocean Twilight Zone. Yeah. So in fact, I was just telling this story this morning. We had some state legislators come by here, I gave them a tour of the fish collection. I showed them the megamouth shark. And some of you are familiar with the megamouth shark, which is a 14-foot long, brand new species, genus, and family of shark discovered in the 1970s when it got tangled in a parachute being used as a sea anchor. And people ask, like, how can something so big go undiscovered for so long? Well, it lives out in the ocean. Well, is it just all by itself out there? No. In fact, it's in one of the most biodiverse places on Earth that is completely out of everybody's mind, which is this plankton zone that drops to 1,500 feet deep during the day and comes up to the surface at night. And this shark, they put a transmitter on one, followed this exact same pattern. There's this enormous ecosystem out there going between the Twilight Zone during the day and the shallows at night that most people don't even know is out there. They're just oblivious to it.
But the fishing industry is.
Oh, they know.
They know. Yeah. And they're exploiting it.
Several Asian countries and Norway are investing big time.
Yeah.
Vessels to use fine mesh nets to exploit the Twilight Zone in the high seas.
Yeah.
And even in coastal under areas under national jurisdiction.
Yeah.
It's a bit like the discovery of krill in Antarctica. Our approach, once you discover it's there, the first thing you think, what can we do with it? How can we
exploit it?
How can we use it? How can we exploit it? How can we sell it? How can we monetize this heretofore unknown part of the planet? Deep sea mining is a similar thing. Instead of saying, wow, I wonder how it works. I wonder who lives there. I wonder how it all fits in with the rest of our life support system. And we haven't answered those questions, but we know that we didn't put it there. It's a part of our system that keeps us alive. And we, at our peril, at not just us, but all of those who are coming along, will have to deal with the destruction we impose right now on these heretofore intact systems. It's like, well, I didn't know it was there. Like, I didn't know my heart was here.
How does that blood work anyway?
Yeah.
So Carolyn is asking a question for Richard. Where is your favorite place to dive in the Pacific?
I get that question a lot.
Where's the biodiversity highest, and can anybody go diving there?
I would ask Owen the same question.
Yeah.
For you?
Well, I mean, Midway Atoll, I swear that snorkeling in chest deep water was a pretty extraordinary experience. I wouldn't call that the most biodiverse, but it just gives you a snapshot of what Mother Nature looks like. I have a hard time answering that question because there's so many metrics that cause me to like something. Biodiversity and abundance is one, rare fish is another, big animals is another. I guess Cocos Island is probably one of my favorite places. I know you've been there many times, and that's a pretty amazing place.
Yeah, Great Feather Bank.
Yeah, Great Feather Bank. That's a little harder to get to. I don't think most, I got one dive there. And if we can get an expedition out there,
Yeah.
that's an extraordinary place. There's lots of places I really want to go that I haven't been. Palmyra is one of them. I've never been.
Yeah. Well, I think that, there are ways that people can, participate more actively in citizen science diving, kind of working, volunteering with an institution. You can get some opportunities to kind of go along and be, have more purposeful diving.
Yeah.
The traditional recreational diving does tend to be kind of, resort based, unfortunately. So, but it's not to say that you can't improve those areas and make a big difference when you travel there to leave it better than we found it and to help restore. Don't go to these small island nations and decide to eat the wildlife that lives there. It's just like, what are you doing?
You used to worry about the wildlife eating you, but that's not really the
No.
worry. Owen,
So,
how about
I guess
you?
I'd also answer that question one other way, which is my favorite place to dive is somewhere no one on earth has ever dived before.
She likes to say her favorite place is anywhere 50 years ago.
So there you go.
For the next dive.
So Bianca is asking,
Oh, wait, I want to hear from Owen first. Where's his
Yeah.
favorite place?
all right, where's your favorite place to dive, Owen?
Midway is the only place I have dived outside of the main Hawaiian Islands, so that takes the cake by far. I'm looking forward to perhaps going to different places around the Pacific, but I think a lot of people think of coral reefs as like a biome in the same way that a forest is a biome or a desert. But the best way I can say is Hawaii is like maybe like Central Park in New York. You can go there and you can see trees and a couple birds, and then you go to Midway and it's like the Amazon rainforest, at least the parts of it that haven't been destroyed. It's just on another scale, and so that's like really the only taste of what it should be I've had. And again, I'd love to see it 50 years ago. I'd love to see Hawaii 200 years ago because I want to see how it compares today. Because I mean, I see lots of sea turtles in Kaneohe Bay, which is great. Great to know they're better. But yeah, in terms of fish, there's not as much as there should be.
Yeah.
And I've never big fish. I've never seen a fish bigger than maybe that big.
Wow.
When I'm snorkeling or diving.
Yeah. So Bianca has a question for you, Owen. What drew you to pursue the career that you selected?
So after Sea of Hope, I was in 10th grade, and I mean, it was just such an incredible life-changing experience. And then I had to go back and read Macbeth and then write essays about this and that. And my GPA dropped quite a bit. I kind of got into a rebellious, like, I don't want to do school anymore. And my mom was a teacher at the school I work. So if you can imagine, that wasn't allowed to fly.
Yeah, it was not going to happen. Yeah.
So I guess my mentality changed, and I wanted to focus more on like the bigger picture instead of just helping out, like, and doing ad hoc little projects that make me feel good, but maybe not are the most effective on a long-term scale. So I've always had a passion for cars, as I mentioned, but I like math and physics and that sort of thing. So I figured I would go and get a degree in engineering and try and apply the engineering mindset of looking at all the facets of it and trying to see what does the most impact, and instead of what just has like an immediate feel good factor of going and picking up 30 invasive plant species in a forest full of millions of them. Like, so I'm trying to play the long game, but it's difficult to focus on school and both of these two and conservation at the same time.
It's kind of applied. It's more applied engineering than applied mechanical engineering.
Yeah.
It's good. It's excellent.
No, I think
Purposeful.
purposeful.
Yeah, purposeful. It's like purposeful diving and purposeful engineering. They're good things. Trying to make a difference, not just to,
Go
create,
with the flow.
go with the flow, which is
Yeah.
perfect.
A lot of my friends, they're like really passionate about getting a high salary so they can like buy
Sure.
things. And I'm like, I mean, money's nice, but I think my dad's mentality that he's instilled upon me is happiness. And
Yeah,
you can't
definitely.
be happy when you know everything that's going on and you're not doing anything about it.
Great. Well, we've got one question in the queue, and we have one raised hand. So let's go to the raised hand. If Gigi could see if he would like to ask us a question.
Glenn Smith, if you'd like to unmute and ask your question.
I like the idea you had of being active in changing the way we handle the seas. And we have the United Nations, seems to me is the most appropriate place to go. But you have other ocean countries that are being more positively impacted by fishing fleets. And why not start there and set an example of what they could do? How would you go about doing that?
Yeah, I don't know. Sylvia, you want to talk about Palau or Maldives or some of these other examples of where these countries that are most directly affected by these things are actually playing a leadership role?
Go for it.
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, I mentioned a couple of countries. Palau comes to mind, where the president of Palau was really proactive, and he actually came to the U.S. and I think he had kind of a snarky speech for President Obama, saying someday you'll wake up to seeing how important it is to protect your environment like we do. And but you know, it was a very clever way of framing it. But some of these island nations that are on the literal front lines of where these problems are happening are waking up to it sooner than the big continental countries are. You know, because they have no choice to. And I think a lot of them are looking into ways to make large protected areas. And I think they, as you say, Glenn, are like great models for role models for the larger, richer countries to follow in terms of setting priorities and realizing how directly the connection is between the health of the environment and the survival of our own species.
Right, and particularly for their, you know, for their own communities. They really do have to pay attention to it.
But yeah, I guess the point is, Glenn, that I think, you know, those countries are actually at the forefront in the leadership and are exploring the pioneering ways to actually make difference at a policy level that can trickle down to actual protection on the reefs in this case. And I think that's a really good point, is that we can't just assume that we'll just protect the high seas through the UN without setting the example from the countries, you know, that 95% of their area is actually ocean. You know, the EEZ area, there's a tiny little dot, like I showed, surrounded by this giant halo of ocean. They're the ones who really get it.
Yeah, definitely the case.
Chile has had 2 presidents who really have been proactive in recognizing the importance of the ocean. Bachelet and now Piñera, on the order of more than 40% of the coastline of the exclusive economic zone of Chile, including Easter Island and the offshore islands altogether, have at least some form of protection. Some of it is not highly protected, but the goal is there. And they, as a country, the leadership in Chile has also had an active role in moving protection forward for Antarctica. That really is not owned by any one nation, but it's technically a part of the high seas, the waters around Antarctica, but it is being heavily exploited right now.
Yeah.
Legally.
I know, legal fishing is also the problem. All right, we're just going to do one last question, and then we've got to wrap up, because we have, as usual, kind of run over a little bit. And I appreciate everybody kind of sticking around. And of course, Owen and Richard putting up with us as we go on. But Martin would like to know, if we had a magic wand, what would we do to protect the ocean with it?
I think we ought to ask these 2 first.
Should we put Owen back on the spot?
Yes.
Put Owen on the spot.
Owen on the spot.
Stop commercial fishing. I mean, that definitely would hurt a lot of people in terms of jobs. But there are ways that we can work around that and create new industries focused on protection. I think we've seen with coronavirus that the government is capable of like putting out mass subsidies in times of crisis, and the pandemic is an example of an immediate crisis, but perhaps one that doesn't have as many ramifications as what the problems with biodiversity will be in the future. So, I mean, that's a very powerful magic wand. Then maybe even beyond that, to change people's perceptions and give them a better understanding. Because if you just take things away from people, they'll get frustrated. But if you teach them why they need to care about protecting these places, then that can go so much further.
Right, kind of use that wand to reconnect people to the environment.
It depends on how powerful this wand is. If this wand could let me travel back in time. I mean, not only just to see what the environment was like a couple of centuries ago, but find a point in history where it's a much less dire trajectory, and persuade people back then through whatever magic or technology I need to do to persuade them that you're setting a course that's a very, very bad course. And if you alter it now, it can have an amplified beneficial effect for the entire future of humanity. And failing that, I guess, you know, on a more tangible real world front end, if we could figure out a clean, limitless energy supply, some kind of flavor of fusion. I keep telling Owen, if he wants to get into changing the world business, figure out how to like convert, you know, hydrogen into helium through energy release. And first of all, we're solving the global shortage of helium, which is my priority number one.
Why do we have balloons, you know?
Well, I need to breathe it down there, and it's getting expensive.
Scary.
But secondarily, having a clean energy source, I think, is probably going to solve a lot of the major problems of this world if we could figure out how to do that. Unfortunately, it'll probably create new ones in terms of, you know, and economic inequality and things like that, which will lead to social strife. But you know, I mean, I guess we have to sort of figure out how to balance all of these problems and solve them simultaneously.
Yeah, I think it all comes back to just finding, you know, a way to be peaceable with nature and quit fighting with it so much.
Conquering.
Conquering, yeah.
Trying to convert.
I've seen her wand. It's a titanium 2x4. You know,
Ceramic.
Glass. It's glass.
So
But-
you should ask yourself that question. I never heard you sound off on what you would do if you were the big boss of the world.
I just said, reconnect people to nature.
All right. Fair enough.
Fair enough.
I got one
mindset
last
of-
question for Liz, if I can.
Uh-oh, here we go.
Did you ever feel in your childhood oversaturated by the ocean, or did you love it from the start in the get-go? In other words, was I too hard on birds?
Yeah.
Should I have been a little more?
We bit, yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, I think I guess if I have one regret, it was not introducing Owen to the natural and ocean world, my world. And honestly, the main reason I didn't was I didn't want to chase him away from it the way I felt I had.
It looks like he's, you know,
Yeah. No,
He's
he's
submerged.
already
he's in
gone
there.
past me, so.
And before we go, Carolyn she's a middle school teacher, and she is saying thanks for you guys being here and our presentations. And she also wanted to remind us, speaking of Midway Island and connections out there, that it's also Jean-Michel Cousteau's birthday today.
Oh,
So
happy birthday to Jean-Michel.
yeah, I don't know how to say it in French. I'm sorry.
Joyeux anniversaire.
Yeah, thank you.
One knows his French too. He speaks
Yeah,
French on top of everything else.
Very good, very good. So I just want to say before we go today, we'd like to thank you all of our guests, and to our producer, Ocean Elders, and to thank everyone who continues to show up and enjoy these conversations with us. Dive In really feels like home to us, and I hope it does to you as well. Water connects us all, and we're so grateful to everyone for coming in. Next time we're going to be meeting with and speaking with Emily Hazelwood and Amber Sparks. We're going to talk about rigs to reef. And until then, take care of the ocean.
As if your life depends on it, because
it does.
It does. It does. Thank you, everyone. Until next time.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
dive in.
Dive in.